Dr. Lewis, do you think that Merkel reads Aristotle? Is that part of what the decision-making process, or do you think that the people there are just trying to cope with a crisis of the moment?
Yeah, I don't know much more about the Chancellor's thinking than I read in the newspapers, and my impression is that she's coping with a very difficult and stressful situation. But I think it's becoming clear that the strains that are resulting from this are going to have political consequences for her, but are already having consequences for other countries. So I don't know on what basis she's making these decisions. I think it's probably very improvisational.
Dr. Schiffman, do you see this influx? And it was interesting you went down to an analysis of when violence happens, and when you put these factors together that we now see as the new reality in Europe, is by your analysis, is that then going to be that will result in violence one way or the other in the months and years to come?
Mr. Chairman, I hope not. And first, let me say that this is the most esoteric congressional hearing probably in a long time. So I appreciate the committee, taking on these sort of more philosophical ideas. The idea that Professor Lewis was talking about and how that merges with what I'm talking about is, these ideas that create cohesion among a society are important, and this is what allows for the provision of public goods and peace and stability. And all of that is absolutely at risk right now. You're absolutely right, as you said in your opening statement. What I tried to point to in my comments are, well, if you're not able to stem the flow, then what are the things that we need to think about? When we need to think about this idea of social isolation and political relevance. That's what sort of the economic literature would suggest. What that means is, and if you look at some of the examples that I cited, you've got this group that doesn't integrate, that's seen as outsiders. They're seen as others. They're not us, they're them. But they might be in my country now. And there might be some detriment to me from them being here, right? And that's a great opportunity for what I would call entrepreneurs of violence to step forward and talk about, recruitment and inciting things that we don't want to see. So those are the things I would point to.
Well, we did see, we here in our own country where we had some people young men who immigrated from Chechnya and leaving their roots behind to come here to live in a freer and more benevolent society, and ended up committing a brutal act of terrorism and murdering some of our fellow citizens. And in terms of prefacing your remarks, the stemming the flow, just for the record, I think that Hungary was totally justified in what it is doing to try to stem the flow. And frankly, if our European allies are not willing to stem the flow of large numbers of people who are not native to their territory, they will lose their territory. And let me note, I believe that's true of the United States as well. And we can be proud that we bring in 1 million people, immigrants, into our country every year, more than every other country of the world combined in terms of legal immigration. But we are making sure that, as you noted in your testimony, that we have a screening process, and we are bringing people in who then can be enculturated and assimilated into our society. That's what, according to your testimony, will minimize the chance of some kind of damage. I don't think that's possible in Europe. Do you have a comment on what's going on there now in relationship? Are these going to be unassimilated populations which will then lead to violence? One for both of you.
So I don't want to comment on the specifics of any particular European country and what they're doing, but I think from the reading of the newspapers, absolutely this is something that we need to be concerned about, and that's why I'm flagging it in my testimony for you all, is to the extent that the flow is too fast and you can't do proper screening and vetting, that's the first threat vector, which is sort of the terrorist integrating within the flow. And then the second is even if when they enter, they're not ISIS affiliated, what's the threat from radicalization? And that's where I point to those two ideas of socially isolated and politically relevant, and that's something that if we can't slow it down, then we have to worry about it whether we slow it down or not. But those are the things that I suggest the committee think about as they hear further testimony from other folks more expert on the specific policies of the European Union.
Like to comment on that, Dr. Lewis?
I mean, I would simply underline the point that both of us have mentioned about the importance of assimilation. And the problem in the particular case we're talking about here is the numbers of people in the short period of time in which they're coming in. They're talking about possibly as many as 1.5 million refugees into Germany just this year, and I think one has to remember that that's on top of millions of refugees that have come in the last 5, 6, 7 years. Germany's a country of 80 million people, so you can sort of do the math. At a certain point, the percentage creeps up, and the question of the ability of the country to assimilate those immigrants is crucial. The United States is a much larger country, and historically, I think we've done a much better job of assimilating immigrants than European countries.
Well, we, of course, have a culture that is a we accept everybody in. That's what our culture is all about, is being proud of the individual rights that people have in terms of their own backgrounds. And so that's not necessarily what keeps the European cultures together. Our belief in liberty and our belief in human rights are supposed to be something that unites us as Americans. In other areas, they have cultural elements that unite them as a people, a particular religion and some particular customs that they have. And I think that Europe is, frankly, this massive influx is going to be, as I mentioned in my opening statement, I believe is going to change the very nature of Europe. And we have seen an historic event, and I believe based on the fact that people are not courageous enough to control their own borders, will soon lose their country. There'll be some other people there, and people who will have different values and different cultures, and that could happen in the United States as well.